I'm Veronica Marshall at the Capitol. This week on Senate Spotlight, Senator-elect no more. This week, Senator-elect Doron Clark was sworn in, ending the Senate's historic tie and power-sharing agreement.
Hoping that we can work together, hoping to continue that.
We have to compromise, and compromise is not a bad word.
What it means for the Senate moving forward. Plus, the Super Bowl is drawing nearer. What are the odds we're getting closer to legalizing sports betting?
We built on all of that momentum, and I feel like we have the bipartisan support.
If we're going to do this, we got to make sure we have every possible protection.
We talked to senators about what it'll take to expand sports betting in the state. That's all coming up.
Senate Spotlight is produced by the Minnesota Senate and Senate Media Services.
With the swearing in of Senator Doron Clark, the temporary tie between the DFL and the Republican caucuses is over. The DFL now has the majority with 34 members. The Republican caucus has 33. So the Senate's first order of business, deciding what's next for the power-sharing agreement. It started with a hand off, and then Senator-elect Doron Clark put his hand up.
To the best of your judgment and ability, so help you God.
I do.
When he put it down again, Clark was no longer Senator-elect. Instead, he left the president's desk with a new title, becoming the 94th legislature's newest senator.
I'm honored to be part of the Senate. I'm mindful of the fact that I'm following the great Senator Carrie Dietzick. She was a friend to all in Northeast, Southeast, and City to Riverside, and I'm grateful to the folks of those neighborhoods who've given me the opportunity to represent them.
While the swearing-in ceremony was the start of something new,
I am proud to say welcome, Senator Clark.
it also brought about the end of the Senate's temporary tie.
This resolution terminates Senate Resolution Number 1, which is the power sharing and responsibility sharing agreement. It is time for us to respect the will of the voters and to restore a majority to the DFL caucus.
But the effort to dissolve the power-sharing agreement developed into a discussion, with Republicans arguing to keep the agreement in place by pointing to the successes of the last 3 weeks and the time needed to adjust committee schedules.
Under this power-sharing agreement, we've been able to hold officials accountable for the actions that we've seen in the state of Minnesota. Just think about it, education policy and finance. We've been able to dig deep into the burdens and the mandates that have been put on our schools.
I just wanted to echo Senator Johnson's comments about the good work that has been done under this power-sharing agreement. And so the A1 amendment simply continues the power sharing for an additional week.
It was always known by those who were negotiating, or those of us who negotiated that agreement, that February 3rd was probably going to be the day, considering certification.
Despite the debate, Senate Resolution 8 passed along party lines.
The Senate Resolution Number 8 is adopted,
leading Republicans to express their concerns about bipartisanship in the future, while Democrats spoke about their commitment to compromise.
Partisanship, it's going to infect the Senate again. And it's really a sad thing after all that we've accomplished over these last 3 weeks.
Because of the electorate and because of Minnesotans, we are in a narrowly divided legislature. And we take seriously in our caucus the need to work together across the aisle, and we will.
After dissolving the power-sharing agreement, the senators voted in their new president. Senator Bobby Joe Champion takes over the presidency with a vote of 34 to 33. Sports betting has a more than $4.7 billion impact in Minnesota and supports 31,000 jobs and counting, according to the American Gaming Association. And some want to see it expand even more. But a recent research study also finds that as sports betting spreads, credit card debt increases and overdraft frequency rises as well. To talk us through this complex issue, I'm now joined by Senator John Marty, who has argued against expanding sports betting in Minnesota. Senator, welcome to Senate Spotlight.
My pleasure.
All right, so last session, a bipartisan group of lawmakers nearly got a sports gambling bill to the floor for a vote. What are we expecting this year?
I'm sure they're going to try again, but I want to emphasize there's bipartisan concern and opposition to it as well. And I think that if they had a vote on the floor, would it have passed? It might have, it might not have. What we have going different this year is there's more evidence as states have been legalizing of the problems related to it. You mentioned one of the studies that came out last summer talking about more credit card debt, more bankruptcies. States that have it have huge increases in bankruptcies, and it's only a small number of people who have the addiction, which suggests a whole lot of the people with the addiction are filing for bankruptcy, and it's a huge problem. We also had studies talking about how it increases risk of domestic violence. We've had studies, we know for a fact that gambling addiction is the most deadly in terms of suicide. Minnesota Gambling Treatment Program director said that more than half the people in the program have thought about suicide, and more than 1 in 5 have attempted suicide. That's far more deadly in suicide risks than any other kind of addiction. So we want to talk about the harms caused by sports betting, not just who profits from it, which has been the total debate for like 30 hearings over the years.
And we know that that harm doesn't only affect the players, right? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. It affects their families, everybody else. I mean, if you look at one of the people we had testifying, I had a hearing on the harms of sports betting. There's never been one, so we had an informational hearing a couple weeks ago. And in that hearing, we had a guy talking about how a lawyer who talked about one of his clients, he was going to court over the children and the spouse of the gambler. The gambler had spent double, triple mortgage. He had spent all the kids' college funds. He spent everything they had. And it doesn't just affect the gambler. It affects their employer, who they often swindle from. It affects their families. It affects the whole community.
Senator, when it comes to public support for legalizing sports betting, some argue there's always a risk and we can't protect everyone from everything. How do you respond to that?
Sure. First of all, in terms of how much support for there is, Missouri last year, they spent tens of millions of dollars to pass a sports betting initiative. Virtually no big money on the other side, but it was tens of millions of dollars promoting it. It squeaked by with a few thousand votes statewide. So it's not overwhelmingly popular, even when they market it and market it and market it. So it's not that popular, first of all. And what about protecting people? Yeah, well, first of all, let's keep in mind, you can bet in Minnesota on sports with your friends, with your neighbors, with strangers, anybody you want. That's not illegal now. If you wanted to bet on the Vikings game a few weeks ago, well, it would have been a tough bet on a lot of things, but you could do it. What we don't have legal is what I'd call predatory sports bookmaking. The people, the corporations, FanDuel, DraftKings, and others, who profit by being predators on the people who are at risk. And so to me, most important thing is if we're going to do this, we got to make sure we have every possible protection and every block on the predators from being able to go in and be predators. I'll give you an analogy for this. In Minnesota, like every other state, we have dram shop laws. If you go into a bar and they see you're looking intoxicated, they will get sued. They have criminal liability if they serve you more alcohol when they see you're intoxicated. Here we have the predators coming in, and right when you're at risk of this, they offer you free bets. That's like saying you go into a bar and you're drunk, and they say, oh, well, we look like a free drink. I mean, in other words, we want to stop the predatory behavior. That's what we have to do most foremost. Because yes, people, even without legal sports betting, do have addictions, and we've got to address them as much as we can. But if we're going to allow a predator in to profit off of that, we got to have extra safeguards.
Well, and speaking of that, a member from your caucus has suggested legislation to create consumer protections on sports betting. What are your thoughts on this proposal?
Sure. I think his proposal doesn't have safeguards of the sort we need. I introduced a bill last year, we'll do it again this year, that has, if Minnesota's going to move forward on this, it should have these safeguards in terms of making sure the companies are liable if they're pushing it on people who are at risk of addiction, if they make safeguards to make sure they can't market it because kids are the ones who see the marketing. All those kind of safeguards, and the proponents say, oh, we got the safest proposal in the country. Well, the country doesn't have safe proposals, period. If we're going to do it, I'd say my bill has safeguards, but the trouble is the industry doesn't like them because they don't profit as much. That's pure and simple the difference. But no, I want those safeguards, but I want a bill with real safeguards.
Okay. A proposal has been set forth by the Republican caucus as well. It's being called the Minnesota Sports Betting Act 2.0. Have you read it yet? Do you find it to be an improvement on previous ones?
I haven't seen this year's Republican bill, but last year's one was pretty similar to the other one. They're just shifting who's making the profits off of it. They're not doing anything to address all the harm. And when I had that hearing a couple weeks ago, it was the Finance Committee. As chair of the Finance Committee, everybody talks about, oh, sports betting is going to give you more money. Well, their bill is take all the money, all the tax money coming out of it and give it to gambling industry, other gambling interests. They don't give money to the state. And I'm looking at the concerns, the addiction concerns, the mental health problems in the schools, the risk of those things, the problems increasing homelessness, problems with people losing their homes because of gambling. We've got all those additional costs that will have a huge impact on the state budget. So I want to make sure we address that. So I think the Republican bill is very similar to the DFL bill. They're both two peas in a pod. They don't really change the problem.
Okay. So you mentioned having the hearing and the committee. Who else needs to be in the room when these discussions are being had?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of the public, including those who have been victims of this, they've got to be heard too. Domestic violence advocates have to be heard on the risk of anything that's going to make domestic violence worse. Even a small increase in that is not acceptable. And addressing all the problems with homelessness and everything else, I think we have to have a much broader conversation that doesn't just talk about what the industry, the quote you had at the beginning, they say, oh, we create all these new jobs. Well, they create all these new harms too, and they profit off those jobs. We pay the cost of the harm. So I want to make sure we do that. And I also think we ought to point out, because they all act as if everybody in the world loves this, everybody's doing it, we're 38 states or something have done it. They keep saying all of our neighboring states have done it. No, Iowa has done it. If you want to sports bet in Wisconsin or North or South Dakota, you can't do the predatory online sports betting. You cannot do that. They only allow at casino property. And so when they say 38 states and everybody's doing it, no. A lot of the states are doing that, and I think 5 years from now, you're going to find out a whole lot of the states that did it are going to be trying to, how do we back away from this? And once the cat's out of the bag, it's kind of hard to get it back in. So I think we should be doing this preventively. Let's make sure, if we're going to legalize it, let's put the safeguards in.
So you mentioned those other 38 states. Is there anything that we can learn from them so far? You mentioned 5 years down the line, but right now, What are we learning from them?
Well, we learned, among other things, a lot of them have had tripling of their calls on their gambling addiction hotlines. We've learned that the industry, the number one thing the industry says, well, it's better that we regulate the market and tax the market than have the unregulated offshore stuff. And there is this illegal offshore stuff. And they came in, when the sports books came and met with me, they said, oh, they don't even check for age. We restrict kids for age. We're going to drive them out. No, they don't drive them out. Massachusetts legalized it a couple of years ago. And what they found out, their commission, which was kind of pro-gambling stuff, acknowledged that a year and a half, 2 years in, they hadn't made any dent in the offshore market. It actually increased. Why? Because kids, in the states that have it, there's just nonstop advertising. You watched the Vikings-Lions game a couple weeks ago, and you saw plenty of ads on it, even though it's not legal in Minnesota, because they're national things. If we have it here, it will be nonstop marketing. And if you're a high school kid, some of your friends are betting offshore illegally and so on, it's not, maybe you don't get hooked into it, but when you watch a football game and every minute you're seeing new ads for this stuff, it drives more people, and they can't bet legally here, so they go to the offshore market. So I'd say that one of the things we've learned is that when the industry says this will displace the illegal market, they're wrong. It doesn't. It increases the illegal market.
Thinking about just how it comes up every year, what would make a comprehensive plan to you?
Sure. Well, if the bill I've introduced, and will introduce again this year, it would basically restrict, if you're going to advertise, which they want to do, first of all, you can't do it on any public facilities, which all of our sports facilities are technically owned by the public. So they can't have on-site logos on the sidelines and everything where people constantly see it. You can't market on TV or newspaper or social media or anywhere if more than 10% of the market is people under 21. Because like in a Super Bowl game, where you have hundreds of thousands of kids watching it, they would allow advertising that. We're saying if it's more than 10% of the audience is underage, you shouldn't be able to do it. That kind of restriction makes a difference. And all this stuff saying the companies, if they push, because they know more details about their gamblers than anybody. They know when you've stepped away from it. They have these VIP treatment people for the big gamblers, that usually the problem people. They have people who will go in, you haven't been betting a lot this week, and they'll call you and say, here, would you like a $500 free bet kind of thing, to hook them in and so on. We want to make sure that if they're doing that, they're liable for it. Same thing that liquor stores are, same thing that that the tobacco industry is in. They're all liable if they're pushing stuff on other people. I think this industry needs it held too. So if we passed a bill like mine, I'd say I'm not a big fan of it. I don't mind people doing what they're doing now, but I don't like the predator coming in. If we're going to do that, I want to make sure we have this. So I accept my bill, I think, is acceptable. The other bills have all the loopholes and all the gaps in it, and it's going to basically grow our addiction problems tremendously.
Senator, any last thoughts on this topic?
As you said, it's been around several years. I expect it will be again, but the biggest change in the last few years is now we're seeing the harms from this, and it is becoming a crisis in the country, and I don't want Minnesota to add to that crisis. So I think we can be the first state to actually put in some real stuff to say, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right.
All right. Thank you, Senator.
My pleasure.
Senator Marty introduced a new bill that he says includes safeguards against the problems created by predatory online sports betting. The bill, named Senate File 978, sets new rules and regulations relating to sports betting marketing, such as prohibiting anyone under 21 from engaging in betting in ads and barring these ads from any medium, like TV or radio, where more than 10% of the audience is under 21. You can find this bill in its entirety, as well as last session's sports betting bills, online at leg.mn.gov. You can search for the bill by its number, author, or topic. Sports betting bills have been introduced in Minnesota for years. Last session, one came down to the wire, almost reaching the floor for a vote, but close doesn't count, as they say. This year, though, proponents bet the odds are in their favor. I'm now joined by Republican Senator Jeremy Miller, who just announced an updated sports betting bill called the Minnesota Sports Betting Act 3.0. Senator, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So this is a topic that you have fought for years. What makes it so important to you?
Yeah, we've been working on this issue for many years because it's an issue that I hear a lot about from not only the constituents that I represent in southeastern Minnesota, but folks all across the state of Minnesota. People are very passionate about sports betting. I believe 39 other states, plus Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., have already legalized sports betting. The states around us have legalized sports betting. So Minnesota is sort of a little island all by itself that has not legalized sports betting yet, and it's a $150 billion industry. People are doing it, so it's time to get it done. And with the momentum and the bipartisan support that we had last session, I believe that we can build on that, and I am hoping that this is the year that we can finally get it done.
Well, this year you have a new effort out, the Minnesota Sports Betting Act 3.0. So talk me through that. What are the changes?
Yeah, so what we're doing with the Minnesota Sports Betting Act 3.0 is we're really trying to build on the momentum and the support that we had last session. There are, the way I look at it, about 3 major stakeholders that are involved in gambling that are interested in sports betting. That's the tribes, the tracks, and charities that offer charitable gambling. Now, of course, the Minnesota Lottery also offers the lottery and gambling, but they're not interested in sports betting. So what I really want to do is let's try to put forward a proposal that all of the stakeholders that are involved in gambling that want to get behind sports betting, that they can get behind this proposal. Let's put a proposal out there that Democrats and Republicans can get behind, and let's put a proposal out there that our most important stakeholder can get behind, and that's the people of Minnesota who are interested in this topic. So we built on all of that momentum, and I feel like we have the bipartisan support in the legislature, and I believe that we're very close to getting the support of all the stakeholders, and I'm confident and optimistic that this might be the year we can get it done.
Now, what would you say the odds are of that?
Well, right now I think the odds are 50-50, but what I do know is we're making progress on getting the tribes on board. We're making progress on getting not one horse racing track, but both horse racing tracks on board, and we're also making significant progress with getting the charities on board. And I would say that this is an issue that I've been working on for a long time, and my preference would be to provide licenses for sports betting to all those organizations that want it. So the tribes, the tracks, the charities. The reality is we don't have the votes to get that done in the legislature. So to me, I could have quit and said, okay, we don't have the votes to get that done. We're not going to do this. That probably would have been the easy thing to do. But anyone who knows me, I don't like to take the easy path. And anything worth having, anything worth getting done, or at least most things worth having, don't come easy. I always say there aren't too many trips down easy streets. So we went back to the drawing board. So the next best thing is, okay, if everyone can't get a license, then how do we make sure that these stakeholders all benefit from a sports betting bill? So we have a proposal, the 3.0 proposal. The tribes benefit by getting a license. The horse racing tracks benefit by getting a portion of the tax revenue that's generated from sports betting. And now that's tax revenue on the license holders and the platforms. So that tax revenue that's generated, the tracks would get a portion of that to help enhance horse racing in Minnesota. The charities would get a portion of that, those charities that offer charitable gambling, for tax relief. One of the things that I found interesting and incredibly disappointing when I became a senator was charities actually pay more in taxes than they do in charitable giving in their communities. And when you look at these charities that offer charitable gambling, you're talking about volunteer fire departments, you're talking about youth sports, service and veterans organizations, and right now they're paying more in taxes than they are giving donations in those communities. So with the Minnesota Sports Betting Act, we would provide tax relief for those charities so they can give more money in their communities. So again, the tribes would benefit, the horse racing tracks would benefit, the charities would benefit, and then another important piece for me, and I think folks across the state of Minnesota, is providing some resources to attract major sporting events to Minnesota. The reason why this is so important is because when the Super Bowl comes to town, or the Final Four, or we just had USA Gymnastics trials, World Junior Hockey is coming, WWE SummerSlam is coming. When these major events come to Minnesota, they have a huge economic impact on communities and the state as a whole. So anything we can do to attract these major sporting events to Minnesota only benefits our state.
Senator, what are you hearing from constituents on this?
I am hearing a lot from constituents. I was just home over the weekend. I was at a Winona State basketball game, and I had multiple people come up to me and say, when are we going to pass sports betting? When I'm at the grocery store, I have people come up to me, Jeremy, when are we going to pass sports betting? Literally everywhere I go, people ask about it. It's a hot topic for those folks that are interested, and there are some concerns from opponents of this that we're going to expand gambling. The reality is gambling is already readily available in Minnesota between gambling at the casinos, the lottery, charitable gambling, and the other reality is people are already betting on sports in Minnesota. They're either doing it illegally on platforms that are overseas, or they're going to other states. For example, the state of Iowa, you can go to the state of Iowa, and as soon as you cross the border, or some people tell me get close to the border, you can place a bet on your mobile device, and then you can come back to Minnesota. And I know folks that literally drive to the border, place their bets, and then come home. So sports betting is already happening, and I think it's time to legalize it so those folks that do want to do it legally can do it, and then we can take advantage of the tax revenue that would be generated as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the tax revenue, you mentioned how it might help some charities. What other benefits would Minnesotans enjoy if sports betting were legalized?
So in the Minnesota Sports Betting Act 3.0, that tax revenue would be split a few different ways. Number one, it would help benefit those charities with tax relief so they can give more charitable donations in the communities that they represent across the state. Number two, it would help enhance horse racing in Minnesota. Number three, it would help attract major sporting events to Minnesota so we can take advantage of that economic impact that those major sporting events have. It would also provide some funding for youth sports as well as problem gambling.
Now, Senator, we know this is a bipartisan issue on both sides, bipartisan support, bipartisan opposition. What can you do to reach those people on the other side of the issue?
Again, I think the folks that are opposed, or at least many of them, are concerned about the expansion of gambling and folks that struggle with problem gambling. And I certainly sympathize with that, don't get me wrong. But again, the reality is gambling in Minnesota is already readily available, and sports betting is already taking place. It's either taking place illegally on offshore accounts, or people are doing it in other states. So my argument is it's happening. It's already readily available. Let's legalize it. Let's benefit from the sales tax revenue that would be generated from it. And then the folks that suffer from problem gambling, this would actually help generate more revenue to provide more resources for more programming and more support for those folks that need it.
All right, thank you, Senator. If your bill were approved, how quickly could it come to Minnesota?
So there are a couple different things we could do. I think to get fully up and running, it could probably take close to a year or so. There have been some other proposals. Actually, Representative Garofalo last year, former Representative Garofalo now, had suggested maybe there's something that we could do if you have a sports betting platform in another state that could easily be turned on in Minnesota. Perhaps we could do that temporarily while our program is getting up and running permanently. So I think there are some things that we could do it more quickly, but probably close to a year to get up and running once we pass the bill, which will hopefully be this year.
Senator, any final thoughts on this topic?
Nothing more at this point.
All right, well, thank you for your time. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Capitol Rotunda rang out with the cheers and voices of dozens of Black business owners and their supporters this week. They came to the People's House to advocate for more than just themselves, but those coming up behind them as well, and the state as a whole.
This is our day.
But it's about more than just a day and more than just the present. Shaletta Brundage says Black Entrepreneurs Day at the Capitol is also about the future.
These kids are seeing us become entrepreneurs, working together. There's enough money in this room for us to support each other and be successful. This is what today is all about.
Starting a business isn't easy. It isn't always glamorous. And for a lot of us, as has been said, we're the first business owners in our families.
To make starting a business easier now and in the future, Black business owners scheduled time with their senators and other legislators to talk one-on-one about their experiences and needs.
70% of our workforce in the next 25 years is going to come from communities colored predominantly a Black community. It makes sense to us to have the best educated, best resourced community we can possibly have to grow the economy across Minnesota.
We are here today to celebrate your hard work and learn how we can make Minnesota a better place for all business owners.
Working together by partisanship, lifting each other up, supporting ideas, and standing up for people when maybe they feel like they don't have a voice. So that's what I'm going to do. That's what you can count on me to do.
So that now the hopes and dreams of the next generation can grow. And when they start their businesses, it'll be with support and on solid ground.
Dr. Lester talked about generational wealth. We always say it, but we need to see it. These are our children. They are seeing entrepreneurs.
This is the Empowerment Event's third year at the Capitol. That's all the time we have today. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.